Just last week, I was in America, Tampa, Florida, and I visited a museum. And there was a film playing in that museum. It was about a people called the Seminole Indians. These were the indigents of Tampa, Florida, that beautiful land that reminded me very much of Yoruba land itself. And what happened to them? There they were in their own land, minding their own business. And strangers came. Strangers came and took ownership of their land. In fact, the film, there were two wars between the Americans who were looking to seize their land. The Americans were looking to seize their land because that area of Florida is where the enslaved Africans, including some of our peoples, were escaping to. And the Indians were giving them refuge. So to close off that avenue of escape from the nightmare of slavery, the Americans determined that they were going to take that land. And they told the Seminole Indians after the First War, where these people fought bravely, that you must move. The Seminoles fought second time around, but they were defeated. And what happened to them? They were relocated to Arkansas. Now, these were people of the coast, of the rainforest, like our own lands, relocated to effective deserts. Now, I tell that story to give context to the issue that I've been asked to address. Where would our people, the Yoruba people, be in 200 years' time? It was Winston Churchill who said, the further back you look, the further ahead you can see. This is why I'm a historian. This is why I read the history books, in order for us to have an understanding of the road ahead. And we must not pretend. There's no room for pretense. The journey so far should be a sign to those of us who are not willfully blind as to what the future portends for us. Nigeria. Let's start with that. In fact, I commend Think Yoruba First for the timing of this gathering and the issue that they've tabled. Because, of course, it was 29th of May, just the other day, that's Bola Ahmed Tinubu, a Yoruba man, was addressing the country. He called it the nation. To mark the first anniversary of his presidency, that many of our people were induced to support and vote for. And he was explaining why he made the decision to take us back to the colonial anthem. An anthem crafted, written by a British woman, in which we're referred to as tribes. This is what a Yoruba man has taken us back to be singing. Though tongue and tribe may differ, The Welsh population of 1.2 million. You never refer to them as a tribe. The Scots a little more, but never a tribe. How does a people, a Yoruba people, who had an empire, suddenly become a tribe? A tribe of what nation, I ask? They say a tribe of the Nigerian nation. Now, there's so much that I could say, but there's particular issues that I want to pick up. First of all, there's a lot of talk in the social media that Nigeria was only supposed to, the amalgamation was only supposed to last for 100 years, and it expired in 2014. This is why we must read history. There was no expiration dates. There was no treaty of amalgamation. The amalgamation was effected in London here, but to be more specific, in Windsor Castle, England, by King George V. That's why there's a King George V Avenue in Onikon. By decree, amalgamation, 13th of November, 1913 was the date of that edict, decree. Perpetual, forever. Anybody telling you 100 years is expired, is over, forget that. It's perpetual. And the other thing that was intended to be perpetual and permanent was the Nigeria itself, the burial of the Yoruba nation and all the other 370 plus nations. It was intended to be permanent and perpetual. And it will be so unless we organize ourselves effectively. What is my evidence? We lawyers like to proceed on the basis of not just saying stuff, but supporting it with evidence. This is a quotation from the architects of Nigeria. Now, if I say who's the architect of Nigeria, you will say who? Any guesses? Goldie, any other? Lugard, any other? Okay, I'm going to make it worth your while for attending this conference today, because Goldie and Lugard were merely the players on the ground. The real architects of Nigeria was a gentleman called Joseph Chamberlain. Now, many of you would not have heard of him. He was the father of the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain. He was the colonial secretary. He was Lugard's Oga. He was Goldie's boss. He was the one who was directing affairs. And this is a quotation from him that tells you that the intention is that Nigeria will be permanent unless we use what Eledumare has given us. This is him. What is the historical progression in the evolution of empire? First, a kingdom slowly consolidating itself, growing conscious of its strength, utilizing its surplus energy to conquer new worlds. Then there comes a time when the empire has been attained. Those who had the courage to gain it, unfortunately, had not the wisdom and experience which would enable them to keep it intact. They lost the greatest jewel that the British Crown had ever possessed. The United States left us for a separate existence. We profited by that experience. Again, a new empire rises from the ashes of the old. And once more, at the end of the 19th century, we have a dominion greater than any before. We have the dominion. But the problem is not yet solved. How to keep the heritage which is given to us, how to make it permanent. It remains to the statesmen of the 20th century, to those now living, and to those yet to come, to complete this great work. Forget 100 years. It was intended to be permanent, and that remains the intention. How did they go about it? There's another key figure that you must know. Is a gentleman called Lord Salisbury. This was the boss of the boss. Salisbury was the prime minister. At the time, Nigeria was created in 1900. He had been prime minister twice before. So this was his third term when Nigeria was created. He had been colonial secretary 3 times, Secretary of State for India. So he knew what he was doing and what he was talking about. Experience. So this is the boss of Chamberlain. This is what he said in terms of how they were going to keep it permanently. Notice his title, Lord Salisbury. This was not somebody who did not, democracy, what is that? So he knew that democracy is a dangerous thing, that you have to control the thing. And he was talking about, he was warning as to the care that must be taken when you are so-called democratizing. He said, I am not wrong in assuming that the men who will be brought to the front by this plan will be lawyers, agents, newspaper writers, not the men of business who have no time for this work, nor the simpler and more numerous members of the community who would not have the requisite qualification. Now, the class thus selected would be, in England, a very trustworthy class. But England is not ruled by conquest. You hear that? England is not ruled by conquest. So, in England, it is appropriate for lawyers, newspaper writers, and others such to be involved in the governance system. But in a country ruled by conquest, let me read on. But England is not ruled by conquest. In India, they are the class amongst whom disaffection is strongest, and they are the most competent to use the weapon which membership of a legislative council would place in their hands to embarrass and damage the governments. On the other hand, they are a class which have no influence over the physical force of the Indian population. They are not to be feared unless we put power into their hands. Are you understanding the strategy? They knew who was who. They knew who was required to run these places competently and in the interests of the people. But those were the ones that they were conspiring to shut out of the governance arrangements. They're the you and I's who've taken the trouble to come this morning to address serious issues, to be shut out. They knew the ones that were going to effectively appoint to run the system, to ruin the system. But from their own perspective is to run, because it's like a company. You've built up your business. The business is called Nigeria PLC. You now want to retire, but you're not shutting down the business. You want to appoint a manager, somebody to manage the business. You're going to choose the person who's going to manage it very, very carefully, in order that he will manage it as effectively as if you were still managing the enterprise. This is what we're dealing with. This is the context in which we have to consider the future of Yoruba land 200 years from now. That future will depend in whose hands our leadership rests. Is it the ones who will take the trouble to come to this kind of event, who want to know, who want to understand? Or the ones who just say, let's just enjoy the ride? Because the answer to where Yoruba land will be in 200 years' time is it depends. If we can get the ones that they want to shut out of the governance system, the Awolowo's, that's why he never made it to presidency. They knew. They knew. You have to credit their intelligence. They study not just events. They study character. They study personality. And we must do the same. You cannot blame them. They have their first 11, playing to the best of their ability, doing the due diligence, the research. But we are, I have to say, we are slightly lazy in our approach. We think it would just happen. We've been induced to rely on prayer, wishes, hope. That's why they be selling renewed hope, recycled hope. Every 4 years, there's another wishful thinking rather than hard thinking. You see, the reality, as I drove down from Northwest London today for this event, and I saw the developments in the city of London, the skyscrapers all over the place. See, the reality is this, that countries, nations are wealthy, rich, not because they are using brain power alone. The foundations were laid through warfare, strength, hard thinking. When you're now strong enough, you can be magnanimous. You can be generous because you're doing it from a position of strength. They understand that very well. All the foundations were laid from a position of strength. So Yoruba nation in 200 years' time would depend on whether we can gather together our strongest minds who would not be distracted by renewed hope and all that kind of nonsense, who would draw the distinction between Yorubas occupying office in the Nigeria project, jobs. So they have this portfolio, that portfolio, and we confuse that as power. Power is the extent to which you can gather your best minds together. They may not be in office, but there's strategic thinking going on. I am confident when I look ahead. Why am I confident? Because the research has been done, which is the hardest part of the exercise. The studying of the past has been done. It's only that our people have not imbibed the knowledge that is available. We're reading Bible and Quran instead of the works that have been done by those who came before us and who were doing the research in our interests. When I read Awolowo's books, I could see he wasn't writing it for himself. He was showing us the way. There ought to be study groups on his works. It shouldn't be read in isolation. There should be study groups, reading classes, bringing people in, because all that we need to know is actually in those books. When I now will come to speak about the way forward, the Orange Union concept, it is not down to me. It is our law. It was in his book. He didn't call it the Orange Union. That was his book, The People's Republic. I believe he wrote that while he was in prison. He could see that we needed a lantern that will guide our pathway. But we have not made the most of the sacrifice that he made. I know what it takes to write those kind of works. The hours that you could be using in a beer parlor, gisting with your friends, chasing babes, or vice versa, ladies chasing the guys, and you sacrifice that for the discipline of sitting down, doing the research, and then doing the writing, because it will be there for posterity. So it's in that book that he explained the concept of the federation of ethnic groups. He knew that these Ondo, Ogun, Lagos, Ekiti, all these are artificial identities. He knew. And he was strategizing to keep the Yoruba nation and the other nations alive. Because we, the Yorubas, are in a privileged position. In this sense, we have never been conquered. People may wonder at that. Say, how comes? The British never conquered us. What they did was to instigate proxy wars. Kiriji was a proxy war, and the ones before it, proxy wars to break down the Oyo Empire, the Yoruba Empire. And we would know what proxy wars look like now, don't we? If not before. You look at Ukraine. Now America is telling them that, yes, those weapons we gave you, you can now use it to hit Russia, but only in this area. You know whose war it is. They say it's not our war. That is a proxy war. The weapons were supplied. That's why Kiriji lasted 16 years. Supplied weapons to both sides. 16 years. Mercenaries, all the ammunition, everything was supplied. Were we making the guns? Were we making the bullets? But when the owner of the proxy war said, okay, everybody dropped their guns, Kiriji came to an end on 23rd of September, 1886. Again, this is why we owe a debt to those who have written. It was Samuel Johnson, History of the Yoruba, took the trouble to write that. That is where that insight came from. So our biggest priority is to get our people to read the books that need to be read, because those books are not written for nothing. This is my book that I wrote in 2017. How many have read this? 1. 2. I've proved my points. Everything you need to know about why Nigeria works the way it is, why the Fulani, for example, are running the show and can act with impunity, is explained here. If Yoruba nation, 200 years ahead, is to avoid the fate of the Seminole Indians, we must sharpen our minds. We must take our minds to the gym. The 6-pack of the body is not enough. The 6-pack that's required is here, because our Creator, Eledumare, has given us that potential. All we have to do is to exercise it, work it out. Now, let me talk briefly about the Orange Union. This is the way forward for the Yoruba nation, as I see it, based on my research. As I said, the further back you look, the further ahead you will see. To those who say they want Yoruba nation now, I say you have to be ready to go through what Biafra went through and to come out better than Biafra did. Are you ready? Now, strategies should never rule out war. You can't. All cards must be on the table, because your freedom is only as good as your ability to protect that freedom. Any freedom that's granted to you, it's on license if you don't have the means to protect it. But the Orange Union, in my view, is the way forward. What is it? It is very simple. It is recognizing the realities that these people haven't thrown us into the net called Nigeria since 1900-1914. Our people want to be together. They want to trade together, do business together, socialize together. But the problem is not intermarriage. Where the problem lies is power, sharing power. Power is like, we've all played the children's game of musical chairs. Even brother and sister, siblings in the same household. When there are plenty of chairs, they're walking slowly. Everybody's doing style. When it gets down to that one chair, twins, you'll see nails, you'll see elbow for that one chair. What these white supremacists who created Nigeria have left us is that 371 plus nations, all of them bigger than Wales, are competing for the one chair. And it's winner takes all. So we were civilized. They came to uncivilize us because before they came, there were 371 seats. They now took 370 away, left one, and said, every 4 years, you struggle for that one seat. So the Orange Union returns us to civilization because each ethnic group will have their seat, just as you're all sitting comfortably now. Imagine if there's only one seat in this room. There'll be the Yoruba seats, where we will choose our number one. Nobody else will vote for that person. Let's see if the Obasanjos and the Tinubus will now win that one seat. Likewise for each of the other ethnic groups, because as in the orange, the segments are distinct, sitting side by side to make the whole. The skin represents the union, but the skin does not get in the way of the segments. Every segment is unique and distinct. And there's no excuse for the Hausa man to now say he wants to control the Yoruba segment, and vice versa. Is win-win rather than winner takes all. Is returning us to a civilized way of living. And the strength of it is this: all the other ethnic groups who are not, except the ones who are greedy or who are not indigenous to the space, will be content with their own segments. Now, provision would have to be made for those who are not indigenous to the space, but that would be by way of negotiation with the indigents. But the idea that somebody from one ethnic group will now come and say he wants to rule or govern the Yoruba space, say your own space is there. The center will be meaningless because nobody knows the name of the president of Switzerland. If we say who's the president of France, you will say, but the president of Switzerland, nobody knows. But Switzerland is standard of living, quality of life, so high. Why? Because it is an Orange Union. So this is the future as I see it, 200 years hence. The option, the choice is ours. We'll either have the Seminole Indians, where we'll be rooted from our land, or we will have the Orange Union, where the Yoruba segments will be distinct. We will run with our own language, our own value system. We will welcome visitors, but they are visitors. I could say so much more, but I know I've been warned on a time front. I want to thank you for the opportunity to address you with these brief comments. Thank you very much.